The thing is, I'm sure if I said, hey, I'll give you $1 million if you can do it next week, they would do it. It's just about pacing yourself and being smart about it and just being tough. Like, don't give up. And it totally can be done.
That Triathlon Show, episode 89. Hey, happy new year everybody, and welcome back to That Triathlon Show and a new year, 2018. This is the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com, and I'm your host, Michael Eriksson. Today's episode is one where we delve into how to train for ultra triathlons with Keith Rieger, somebody who's done 5 Kona Ironmans in 5 days back to back to back, and is now starting an event around that called the Kona 5. We'll talk about how to get started with ultra triathlons and how to train for them and prepare for them in general, if that interests you. But if ultra triathlons is not your thing, Keith is also a very decorated runner, so we'll get into some of his top running tips for triathletes. So that's something that will be very beneficial for you, whether you're doing ultra triathlons or just short and sharp sprint triathlons. So there's something for everybody in this episode. Also, at the end of this episode, I'll talk a little bit about what's coming up in 2018 for that triathlon show. So stay tuned for that, and I will mention a survey where you can have an impact. You can make your voice heard. What kind of content do you want to hear on that triathlon show in 2018? So stick around to the end of the episode to hear more about that. But first, this episode is sponsored by Precision Hydration. They have sweat tested thousands of athletes, and the average athlete loses about 950 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat, which is about twice what most traditional electrolyte supplements contain. To find out your ballpark number quickly, easily, and for free, go to precisionhydration.com, which I linked to down below in the show notes. And if you want to buy their products, you can use the discount code THATTRIATHLONSHOW, all one word, for 15% off. And this episode is also sponsored by Ventum. The Ventum 1 is a superbike with no down tube and no seat stays, which makes it more aerodynamic than any traditional triathlon bike. You can read all about their impressive wind tunnel results on VentumRacing.com, where they compared that to other superbikes or other triathlon bikes, and Ventum 1 demonstrated significantly better aerodynamic performance with up to 24% less drag compared to the closest competing triathlon bike tested. So if you're in the market for a new tri-bike, then the Ventum 1 is the way to go. Now a short introduction to Keith Rieger, today's guest. He is the founder and event director of Kona 5. He's a former NCAA nationally ranked distance runner, a 20-time Ironman finisher, and 3-time Xterra trail running world champion. He's a world duathlon bronze medalist, a 3-time Western States 100-mile finisher, and a 3 times Grand Canyon rim-to-rim-to-rim finisher. In addition, he is the founder and head coach of the Surprise Running Club in Surprise, Arizona, and also of the Surprise Special Olympics track and field team. He is originally from Georgetown in Ontario, Canada, but as I said, currently lives in Arizona, and he has written a book called Kona 5, Taking on Life's Challenges and Kona's Toughest Ultra Triathlon. And in November 2017, doing his second Kona 5 together with another ultra triathlete, Joshua Baker, they were filmed by Metatail Productions, and this will be released as a documentary in spring 2018. But without any further ado, let's hear the interview with Keith Rieger on ultra triathlon training and racing. So tonight I'm joined by Keith Rieger from Arizona. How are you doing, Keith?
Hey, great. Thanks for having me on the show.
It's my pleasure. We have been having an email conversation here about your background a little bit, and especially your ultra triathlon endeavors. You are the founder of Kona 5, which means 5 Kona Ironmans back to back to back to back, 5 days in a row, which sounds insane to me, but you've done that twice already, and now you've started an event about that. So how did that come about?
Yeah, that's the thing is, it's amazing sort of the journey that's brought me to ultra triathlon is that I grew up really more as a hockey player, and it wasn't until after high school I got into running and was fortunate enough to get a scholarship at University of New Mexico. So here I am, a kid growing up in Toronto, Canada, and moving on to the States, and had a great running career there doing cross country and steeplechase. And then it was after I finished my university career, I'd seen, the Western States 100-mile endurance run on TV, and I'd seen the Kona Ironman on TV, and I kind of had those things as a bucket list items. So I tackled the Western States first. So I got into ultra running, started doing 50 milers, 100 milers, things to qualify, and finally got in the lottery, and ultimately ended up doing 3 times the Western States 100-mile endurance run. And then once I got that behind me, I said, hey, okay, now I'm going to work on the Kona Ironman. So I started learning how to swim, learning how to bike, kind of like you, Mikal. Started off as a runner, so you had to go back to square one with these other sports. And so, yeah, I started doing triathlons and halves, and then eventually Ironmans. And I ended up reading Rich Roll's book, Finding Ultra, years ago, and learned about this Epic 5, where they were doing 5 Ironmans, 5 days, 5 Hawaiian Islands. And in 2014, I ended up getting opportunity to crew for a friend of mine to do it. And then a week before, he ends up getting injured and isn't able to do it. So meanwhile, he'd already paid his entry fee. He'd already paid for all of my flights, and all the logistics were in place to do it. So I was really blessed. The director gave me an opportunity, said, hey, by chance, do you want to do it? Since they only had 2 other athletes, they kind of needed some people to fill it out. And I said, wow, when am I going to get the chance to do this? Even though I hadn't really been swimming or biking for a while. I'd taken a little break from triathlon training, was more focused on ultras again. And so I actually had to rent a bike, had to, get a wetsuit last minute, and I just jumped into it and ended up doing that event. And that kind of opened me up to the whole ultra triathlon thing. And that gave me the idea, hey, wow, the last one at Epic 5 is on Kona, the Kona course. And I said, this is the one I really want to do. And I could probably really simplify the logistics of it and the expense of it by doing this 5 days in a row. And so that's when I came up with the idea for Kona 5. And so I did that solo last year and ended up writing a book about it, Kona 5. It's on Amazon. And so it's about that event, but it's also kind of my biography. And then I started hearing from a lot of other people that were keen on doing it. And so I made it a public event this year and had another fellow join me, Joshua Baker. And so we just finished it last month. We both completed it successfully, and it was quite the adventure.
You kind of brushed over your running career there, but that's something that I think would make sense to give us a bit of a background piece of information, because it's quite distinguished, isn't it? What are some of your main achievements in your running days?
Sure. Yeah. So my specialty, was cross country and university, and then I got into steeplechase. That's where you're doing 3,000 meters. You got the barriers and the water jump. I love this sort of the adventure, the challenge of that, and ended up having some really good success with that. Ran at Penn relays and Drake relays, Texas relays, Mount Sac relays, and just got some great experience with that. And so, after I finished university, when I got into doing some ultras, my goal was to do Western States. So pretty much any event I did was qualifier, had something to do with getting towards Western States. And so that was kind of my main thing. And then I ended up doing, a few other running events along the way, including the Xterra Trail Running World Championships. And that one's in Hawaii on Oahu. And I had a friend that had done it, a girl who ended up winning it overall. And I had done a few local events with her. So I kind of had an idea as where my pacing was with her. And I saw her times, I saw where she placed, and I kind of said, you know what, I think I have a chance to actually win that. And so when did you get the opportunity to get a world championship? So anyway, so I packed my bags and went to Hawaii for the very first time. I think that was back like 2012, and did the Xterra Trail Running World Championships and won my age group. I think I finished 9th overall that year, and here I am in my 40s, and still able to compete at a pretty good level. And so, yeah, I ended up going back 2 more times to win my age group 3 years in a row. And after that, I was like, okay, that's a pretty cool accomplishment, and kind of put that on the shelf and started focusing more on the ultra triathlon stuff.
So for the ultra triathlon, when you first did that Epic 5, how big of a shock was that when you hadn't even prepared for it, but you were still able to do it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was pretty amazed that I was able to, get through it. And it just kind of goes to show that it's so much about your mental side of it, believing that you can do it, and pacing yourself, being wise about that, and being wise about your hydration, nutrition. And so ultimately I ended up doing 3 out of the 5. And so I did the first one, the second one, and then took 2 days off. I was pacing the other 2 guys that were doing it, and then saved myself for the last one. And so, yeah, I was pretty surprised at what I was able to do. It kind of opened up the floodgates of, wow, maybe I can do something even crazier than this. And it, helped me to reset my goals and make them, I think, even bigger and better.
And to set the background a little bit, what's your level like in swimming and biking? Let's say you do one-off Ironman as fast as you can. What would you do in the swim and in the bike?
Yeah. So my PR for Ironman swim is a 105. And that was a few years ago. I think I've been improving a little bit on that. And then my bike is a 516. And then my marathon, that's my strength. I did a 309 when I was, I think, a few years ago. So I was in my 40s and did that.
Yeah,
so
that's
I've just never put together. Yeah, I've just never put together that perfect race to qualify. I'd always just miss out, and so I haven't actually done Kona by itself at the World Championships, and so that's what kind of gave me the idea too to come up with this event so I could experience it in a kind of a different way.
Yeah, and only do 5 in a row.
yeah, exactly.
So what did you, when you trained for Kona 5, because at that point I assumed that you did a lot of preparation and training for it. How did you train? And what surprised you the most about the preparation that it took for it?
Sure. Yeah, that's the thing with when you start getting into ultras, it's really the training that's the biggest challenge is blocking out that much time and trying to keep balance in your life, especially
what was your weekly training volume at like your average and then your peak weekly training volume?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I would say probably, I'll give you the peak first, is that I build up. Really, I'm always sort of training just to keep in shape and getting out for maybe 10 hours a week. I just enjoy that. So I always have that base fitness. So when I start to get ready for Kona 5, I really only need maybe 3 months to do it. And so I'll build up to where I am swimming maybe 4 or 5 times a week. And I'm getting up to 6,000 meters, maybe even 7 or 8 on a few of the longer days. And so I'm mixing in drills and intervals, and then doing some distance swims. I even did my longest swim ever getting ready for this Kona 5. I did 10K in a 25-meter pool. So that was quite a few flip turns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have a Garmin to keep track of how long you had been going, or did you count like real swimmers do?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Is that fortunately, yeah, I have the Garmin the 935, and yeah, I think you're going to ask me for some tips or insights later, but that was going to be one of them. Is that, man? I always had the Garmin 910, which was great, but man, this 935 is amazing. I love it. It just all the analytics and everything. And you, Macau, being a scientific guy, I imagine you love it, be able to analyze what your athletes are doing that you're coaching, or even yourself. But yeah, it was great. I was able to really track the swims easily. But also too, yeah, with the bikes, is that the training for that. I put in quite a bit of mileage there. I built up to where I was doing like 3 rides a week. I would go out and do probably the peak. I was doing 80 one day, probably 80 miles another day, and then do a long one. I built up to like 140 miles, and to try to make 112 seem easy.
Yeah.
So
did you have the shorter rides? What went into them? Did you have any sort of intensity or any sort of race pacing, or what was it just riding and getting out there and getting the miles in?
Right. Yeah, I try to mix things up. So the shorter rides, I'm always doing either 1 mile intervals or 2 mile intervals. And so it'll be 1 mile on, 1 mile off, and just are constantly doing that. And nothing too crazy because, yeah, you're building for an ultra. It's not like you're doing a 70.3 or something like that. So when, probably max 80% of my VO2. And then on the long days is that I would do some intervals where I'm just pulling a really tough gear. So just building up that strength for a mile at a time. Out of every 5 miles, I'll do that. And then I'll throw in some hills in there too, where I'm actually getting out of the saddle. And that's key too with Kona, is that there's some pretty good hills in there, especially climbing up to a V, and you got a headwind and some of those hills. So that's what I do on the bike. Just to finish up that training volume question is, yeah, with the running, is that I get out probably 4 times a week. And same thing, mixing it up. I do like 400-meter intervals and 800-meter intervals. And I do that about twice a week. Then I would do a run that's kind of a strength training run where I'd mix in like lunges and knee lifts and butt kicks, and then even some wind sprints into that run. And I call that kind of my strength training run. And I would get up to like 12, 14 miles of that. And then I would do one really long run, and I get out on the trails to do that. And I built up to maybe like 22 miles. And that was pretty much it.
Yeah. So for those 400 and 800 meter intervals that you mentioned, is that again a bit more moderate in intensity? Like you mentioned, 80% of VO2, so that's a bit below threshold. Was that the same with the run, or did you do them harder, or what was the intensity for those intervals?
Right. Good question. Yeah. Being the ultras, I'm really only getting up to probably 90% on those. More because I just love running. I love running fast. But I try to hold back. That's the key thing too, is that in all this ultra training, is that it's usually going to be the run that's going to get you injured. So I'm really hyper careful of not pushing myself too much on the run.
Yeah, and the number of sessions there that you have 4 swims, 4 runs, and 3 rides. I mean, that's not a lot of more serious age groupers train that number of sessions, but I guess it's the time that you need to put in that makes it very different from preparing for a 70.3 or something. So what did the weekly volume in terms of hours end up being, if you have that?
Right. I would guess it's getting up around 20 to 25 a week.
Yeah. Well, it's still surprisingly, I don't know. I guess I would have imagined maybe 25 to 30. It may potentially even more than 30. So yeah, it's on the low end of what I would have expected. So I think that's something that anybody who's kind of interested in ultras can take away, that it doesn't need to be like insane amounts of volume, even though that's obviously a lot, a whole
Yeah,
lot.
I totally agree with that, and that's probably one of the biggest takeaways I had from that Epic 5 was that I hadn't swam in months, I hadn't biked in over a year, and fortunately I had some running base, but I just jumped into that and was fine. And so that's the thing, like, I talk to people they're keen on doing Kona 5, but maybe they say they've only done an Ironman recently. So I kind of laugh at that, of course. But the thing is, I'm sure if I said, hey, I'll give you $1 million if you can do it next week, they would do it. It's just about pacing yourself and being smart about it and just being tough, like don't give up. And it totally can be done.
Yeah,
you don't
yeah.
have to do a crazy amount of training. Probably the biggest reason that I did that so much training, especially this time around, was because I was directing this event too. We had a whole film crew out there. I'm trying to manage the social media and I'm trying to coach Joshua, the other athlete that's with me. The most that he'd ever done is a 2-day event. And so I'm trying to manage all this stuff. And so I'm like, okay, I got to make sure that I'm rock solid as far as doing the event so that I can be, get done in a reasonable amount of time and to be, super sharp and not be a liability to everybody else. I'd be more of an asset to be able to help with running the event.
Yeah. Let's just really quickly run through an example swim session. You kind of alluded to what you had in there, but what would a key swim set look like for you?
Sure. So probably like say I was doing 5,000 meters is that I would do a 500 meter warm up. And then I would do start with 50-meter intervals with roughly like a 15-second break in between. Then I'd get up to 100 meters, 200, probably 200 is probably the max. And so I'm doing like thousands of those, like 1,000 meters of 50, 1,000 meters of 100 and so forth. And then, then I might mix in some drills too. And so that's probably about it. And if I could share some insights on swimming, is one of the things, I learned about you, Mikal, is with your running background, you had to learn how to swim at a later point in life. And so, yeah, getting a coach was so key and helping me to figure out what I was doing right and what I needed to improve, and to be able to film you, to give you that visual feedback, and to help you, work on the specific drills that are really going to benefit. And so for me, that was recently, I've really learned a lot from swimsmooth.com, that website and that coaching program. And the key for me was in increasing my cadence, and then learning to, I always would breathe on both sides, but I'd breathe every 2 strokes. And so I increased it to every 3 strokes, so bilateral breathing, and just even things out. And because my cadence higher, is that allowed me to breathe still on a pretty much regular basis and a comfortable basis. And that's what probably helped me the most with my swimming.
Yeah, I totally agree. We actually, in the episode after this one, I've already done the interview. We talk about aerodynamics and upgrades, and we do like a cost benefit analysis, like how much time can you save per euro spent or dollar spent. And in triathlon, if you broaden the scope to triathlon, I think that getting a swim coach, if you're a non-swimmer, that's by far the best investment you can make. The most time saved from money spent can come from having a few coached lessons. And I totally agree. SwimSmooth is a brilliant resource. I don't agree personally with the bilateral breathing, at least in training, but I don't really think that's not something that I recommend in racing. But
right.
To each his own. And you found something that worked for you. And at the end of the day, that's what matters the most. Was there anything I was asking you about anything that you surprised you about the training, or maybe that you found the most challenging? What was that?
Yeah, the most challenging is, just putting that time in is tricky. So you got to make sure that you got all your ducks in a row. The rest of your life is under control. for me, I'm pretty fortunate. I'm a marketing professor. I teach all my classes online nowadays. You got to love technology. And so that allows me to teach from anywhere at any time. So, that's the one major advantage I have over probably most people that are working that 40-hour work week or even more, is that I'm able to get that training in. So that's probably the biggest thing, is just setting aside that time. At the same time, too, is don't worry too much if you can't put in that much time, as we talked about earlier. You can still go out and do an Ironman with a limited amount of training. Sure, you might just have to scale back your pace and be a bit more realistic with your goals, but it totally can be done.
Are there any? You're probably much more familiar with the ultra triathlon world than I am. So, do you have any recommendations for like a first ultra triathlon event that somebody interested might try to tackle as their first one?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm probably not the best person to ask, because I didn't take the traditional route. I kind of just got thrown into this. And so I kind of skipped the whole Ultraman thing, where that's like a 3-day event. But from what I understand, those are pretty awesome events. And I think there's a pretty good amount of them around. I think Florida's coming up in February. And so I think that consists of like a 10K swim they start with on day one. Then I think they do maybe like 70 miles on the bike that day. Then they all stop. You sleep that night. The next day you go out and bike. And I think they're biking like 200 plus miles on the second day. And then the third day they're doing a 50-mile run. And so I think those are well-run events. I would imagine that would be a good first event.
Yeah. What about the things that come into preparing for an ultra triathlon outside of the training, like the preparation, planning, equipment, nutrition, and so on? What tips do you have about those topics?
Yeah, is that I would say get a good coach, and get somebody that has that experience, and they're going to just help you to do it. I'm all about working smarter, not harder. And so tap into,
That said, Keith, not everybody is going to do that. I wish they would, but they're not. So
right.
So let's try to give some tips for people that want to try to do something themselves.
Right. Okay. How about, Mikhail, can you steer me a little bit more there on what you want me to touch on?
Yeah, okay. Let's start with the preparation and planning. Do you need to what do you need to how do you sit down with the map and make a pace plan or something like that, or what specific things do you do there?
Right. Okay. Yep. So of course, pick out your event, and hopefully you have at least probably 3 or 4 months to prepare for an ultra. And hopefully you have a reasonable base, like that you could go out and do Olympic triathlon tomorrow if you had to. And then, the 10% rule of building up only 10% more each week. And I'm all about periodization too, meaning that you're going to build for 3 weeks and then recover for a week, and then, do that again the following month. And initially, start with more about low intensity, and slowly build that up too. You don't need much intensity if you're doing an ultra. But that's it. And then, I do, believe it or not, I do most of my training programs I have in my head. I don't even write them down. I think because I've been doing it long enough, I know my body, is that I just kind of go off of rough guidelines that I have in my head, and I go a lot by feel. I don't actually ever schedule even a day off, because I know that either I'm going to feel tired someday or feel sore, and I'll just take it off then, or life will get in the way and I'll just have a bunch of work stuff or other stuff going on, and I'll have to miss some workouts. So I know that I'm eventually get some time off, but that's kind of the way I do it.
Yeah, I think that's actually a very smart thing to do. It depends on the person, of course, but
yeah,
but I think that sounds like very smart to do that, because as you said, that something is coming up.
Right. And so that's the way I do it, but I'm pretty experienced. I coach a lot of people myself. And so I wouldn't say advise that method for everybody. I would say, yeah, write it down, even if it's something as simple as getting a pad of paper out or your phone out. Do what you got to do, or of course tap into like Training Peaks or other great programs like that. And if you have a coach, I'm sure they got a preferred program they want to use. But yeah, keep that in mind that you got to go how you feel, and even though you have a plan written down, is that it's not going to go exactly like that.
And with preparation for the event itself, do you have a pace plan, or how did you pace the event? Did you use heart rate or pace or just perceived exertion?
Right. I do more perceived exertion, and for the Kona 5 is, yeah, you definitely got to go out easy. And that's kind of the cool part about it, is that, because it's an ultra, you're doing it 5 days in a row, is you're not going at, crazy race pace. You're able to kind of enjoy it, enjoy the scenery, enjoy the camaraderie of it, and take it all in. And so at the same time, even that first day, you got to hold back. And even though you feel good, you're excited, your adrenaline's going, you got to hold back and save yourself for the following days. And but it is kind of funny though, Mikkel, because the constant thing in your head is, as soon as you wake up, you're like, every minute counts. And so you want to get done as quick as you can, so that, you're going to maximize your sleep that night. But at the same time, you got to hold back so you don't burn yourself out. So you can't go too fast. And
so how long did you roughly take to complete the Ironman each day? And then I guess you eat and you go to sleep as quickly as possible. How much sleep did you get per night?
Right. So I would get up about 5:15 every morning, and then our goal was to leave at 6 a.m. sharp, soon as there was a little bit of daylight. And so the one unique thing about this event too is we start with the bike, and so that allows us to get going even when it's still a little bit dark out, and minimizes the heat and minimizes the wind and minimizes the traffic. And so we start with that bike. We would usually be done by about 1:30 in the afternoon, maybe 2, because we're taking breaks along the way, stopping at convenience stores to restock. And at the halfway point in Hawaii, we'd stop at the coffee shop and literally have a light lunch and coffee. And so, it's a bit of a leisurely pace, even though
that sounds nice.
Yeah, even though we're still, as far as riding, we're averaging probably around 17 and a half miles per hour. One day we were up over 18. And whereas if I was doing, an Ironman just by itself, I'd be up over 21. So it's a much more leisurely pace. And then we would do the swim next. And I would do that like around a 1:10, and that's no breaks, just keep going, of course. And same thing, it's awesome, the beauty of seeing the coral reef, the fish, the turtles, you name it, dolphins out there, and you get to just kind of enjoy all that. And when you're not going at race pace. So then we do the marathon last, and so we get started with that around probably like 4:35, somewhere in there. And so it's pretty cool running along Ali'i Drive as the sun's going down, checking out the ocean and just the town and all the people and everything, all the action. And then usually finishing the marathon around 9:30, 10 in the evening. And so, yeah, the whole thing with breaks, you're looking at about like a 15 and a half Ironman each day. So the trick for me is that with my work, is that it never stops. And so I still had to, as a marketing professor, I still had to grade papers and check in with my classes. Yeah. So a few of the days where I had a ton of grading to do, I was up till 2 a.m. Trying to finish all that. And so I think where Joshua was getting probably, 5 hours a night is like I was getting less some nights. I was like that one night I only got 3 hours sleep.
It's crazy. I'm just typing here because I think that will be the outtake from this episode that goes at the beginning of every show. That was so crazy. So what about okay, but that's you're not getting much sleep, but then again it's 5 days, so it sounds like it's still manageable, and you still get on some of those nights maybe you get almost 7 hours of sleep. What about nutrition? That's the final part of this ultra triathlon part of the interview that I want to get into. What do you do for nutrition?
Sure. Is one of the biggest sort of maybe things I had to learn and mistakes I see by other newbies is trying to eat too much, and especially during the event. And so I keep it pretty simple, and I do quite a bit of a liquid diet. So for the Kona 5, I'd get up first thing in the morning, I'd do a fruit smoothie, and a little bit of protein powder, but it's just all organic fruit in a smoothie. Easy to digest, good to hydrate you, and that was the main thing. And then during the bike, I would take like a power bar with me, and I'd do Gatorade, and I would do Ensure, and then at the halfway point, I'd always make the only real solid food besides the maybe a little bit of power bar stuff is I'd bring a toasted almond butter and jam sandwich, and like on healthy bread, Ezekiel bread. And that was it for my lunch, pretty light. I'd usually have a iced coffee, and and then pretty much Gatorade. And then I would do S-caps for my salt and electrolytes. I'd probably do a total of about 8 of those a day. And so that was it. And when I get back from the bike, so we go back to the Kona 5 house, kind of regroup. I would do a protein smoothie where I do almond milk with an egg, and then almond butter, protein powder, and a banana.
Okay, so I gotta interject here because I'm a big smoothie fan myself, and I love eggs as well. But when you do the smoothie, do you put the egg raw in the blender and then you just blend it, or how do you include the egg in the smoothie? Or did I totally misunderstand you?
Yeah, no, that's good. Everything into to the blender. Yeah, and mixes it all up, and yeah, you wonder like, wow,
brilliant. I mix my eggs in my oatmeal, which is something that almost nobody does. So that's something that I use eggs for. But this is new, so yeah, I'll actually go and try this after this.
So you're putting raw eggs in your oatmeal?
I do. Yeah, I do.
Oh, you're like Rocky.
And Greek yogurt, but then I warm it up in the microwave. So
awesome.
it kind of cooks, but yeah, it's brilliant. And then some berries, and you can even put protein powder in the oatmeal as well. So
that's
a complete meal.
Oh, that's funny. That reminds me, when I was a kid and I watched Rocky for the first time, and I don't know if you've seen that movie, but yeah, I think you're a bit younger than me. But he'd get up in the morning to go for his runs, and he'd get the raw eggs, right, and put them in the glass and drink raw eggs.
Yeah.
So I remember doing that when I was a kid, trying that. And after the first time, I was like, yeah, not doing that again. This is a bad idea. So anyway, I put everything into the blender, and it tastes awesome, and get a lot of calories in you, and pretty easily to digest. And then head off to the swim. And so we'd run down to the pier and take an energy drink with me, like usually just Gatorade. That's the thing. I don't do anything too fancy. I use a lot of Hammer Nutrition products, but I'll even a lot of times just prefer Gatorade. And so that's what I'm doing. And
do you know how many calories you're getting, and are you on a specific plan to get in a certain amount of calories per hour that you're pretty particular about it, or is it more on feel?
Yeah, I don't get too analytic about it. It's more by feel. But I think the key is, one of the things I learned from doing ultras is, especially if you're pushing yourself, say like the Western States 100 mile, is that your body can only digest like probably about 300 calories an hour.
Yeah,
and so the mistake is people try to think that they got to replace each calorie that they're burning. And your body just can't digest it. And so that's why people, get bloated, why they get nauseous, and why they get sick. And sure enough, even, Joshua experienced that. You'll see it, when the movie comes out, is after day 2, he wasn't nearly as, focused on his nutrition. He was kind of just eating whatever. And, I was trying to coach him up on it, but he ended up kind of learning the hard way. He was just trying to take in too many calories, and he got pretty nauseous, pretty sick. And it wasn't until he slowed that down and focused more on liquid calories and is that he, came around. But that's the thing for me, is about 300 an hour, and realize, your body, the blood is going to your skin to cool you down, especially when it's hot in Hawaii. And it's going to your muscles, of course, to bring oxygen. And so it's not going to your stomach to digest that food. So it's very limited what you can digest. And so that's why I keep it simple.
Yeah. And 300 calories per hour, that's 75 grams of carbs. Or, if you maybe have something else, but mostly carbs, it sounds like, with the liquid diet. So that's right in that sweet spot range, as you say. Let's quickly cover running, because as we talked about, you have been a very competitive runner, and you are the founder and head coach of the Surprise Running Club in Arizona. So I have just a few questions for the listeners that may not be super interested in ultra triathlon, but I think that they can get a lot of value out of from you with your running experience. So the first of these questions is, and again, keep it short and concise, what are some common mistakes you see triathletes or even runners make in their run training?
Sure. I would say that they ramp up their training too quick, especially if they're newbies and they get injured. So, ramp it up slowly. Go with that 10% rule of only 10% more each week. Make sure you have, some recovery time in there. And listen to your body. Like, if you're feeling something, is back off. And that's one of the benefits of triathlon. And one of the reasons I took it up, similar to you, Mikkel, is, anytime I feel any tweak, like something not right with my running, is I back off and I go bike, I go swim. And that's the thing. Like, when you're doing triathlon training, is almost all the injuries are going to come from running, not swimming or bike. So, be super careful. When you feel something coming on, back off. The other key thing I didn't really mention is I do all my training on soft surfaces. So
that's the Albert Salazar model.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Yeah, he was training athletes at University of New Mexico when I was there. So I watch him do that with his athletes. They're all running on the grass. And so that's unfortunate where I live. We got great parks around here. I do all my intervals on the grass, and I wear kind of a minimal shoe, pretty much a cross-country shoe. Allows me to get up on the balls of my feet, have good running form, and I do that. In my super long runs, I go up into the mountains, I run on the trail. I never run on the sidewalk or on the roads. I totally try to avoid that.
Yeah, and especially training for an ultra, can imagine that has saved you, really. For the listeners that may not know, Albert Salazar is a great running coach and former elite runner, one of the best in the world in his time, who coaches Mo Farah and Galen Rupp, among others. So let's say you do that, you are careful, and maybe you switch your running on hard surfaces to soft surfaces. What are some tips that you can give the listeners to make sure that their run training is effective in terms of how to structure it, and maybe some workouts that you have a tendency to be drawn towards?
Sure. So a few quick tips is that periodization too, where you're not going hard all the time. I see that mistake. So say if you look at a whole year plan, is build for maybe 5 to 6 months, and then take a month off, and then back off big time, and then do the same thing for the second half of the year. But you have your times where you're building, you have your times for your recovery. Same thing then if you break it down by the month. We said build for 3 weeks, have a recovery week. And then even throughout each week is that I try to mix in those intervals with the long stuff. And so I rarely run in the middle, meaning go out for sort of a medium pace run. I'm either working on my speed doing like 400-meter intervals or 800-meter intervals, or I'm working on my endurance where I'm going really slow, really long.
Yeah.
And so with intervals is that me being kind of an efficient guy is I don't like wasting time. And so I don't stop at all with those interval runs. So I do say 400 meters fast, but then I'll do 400 meters easy. So I'm not actually stopping. And so I'm always moving. And so that allows me to kind of pack in a really solid workout in the least amount of time.
And I think there is actually some solid evidence about active recoveries being more beneficial for performing in subsequent intervals than passive recoveries just standing around. So yeah, I totally agree with that approach on just jogging between intervals and not standing.
Good to hear.
Yeah. So if you do, let's say you coach a triathlete who is doing 3 runs per week, would one be a long run and one an interval run, and the third one would be just basic, or I don't want to put words in your mouth. Yeah. What would that be in general or on average?
I'd probably say if they were doing 3, is I would do that third one. I always do as that strength run that I kind of alluded to earlier, where you're going at a easy pace, and every mile I'll mix in the knee lifts. Like I'll do 50 to 100 knee lifts. And then I'll mix in like 30 to 50 lunges, and then like probably like 50 butt kicks. And then I'll mix in a wind sprint where I'm doing maybe about 75 meters on a gradual uphill where I'll build up my speed. And that helps have that speed, but also it's good for strength building too. So that's kind of my strength run. And it gives some variety. It's kind of fun to do.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Let's move into the rapid fire questions. And the first one is, what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to triathlon or endurance sports?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have so many. I'm huge on reading, and especially when you're out there on the long bike rides, is I'm always listening to audible.com. I'm listening to audiobooks, and I'm listening to podcasts like yours and Rich Roll's podcast. I love it. And as far as triathlon goes, is a couple of books I'll tell you is one of the first I ever read was Swimming to Antarctica with Lynn Cox. She's an ultra swimmer, and her kind of niche is cold water swimming. And she actually swam like over a mile in the Antarctica, and the water temperature was like 30 Fahrenheit. It wasn't frozen because it was salt water. And she did this without a wetsuit. And anyway, as far as what I took from that book was just her mental toughness. And I was always like the guy that, first to complain about the pool being cold or swimming in ultra water, open water and being like, scared of sharks or whatever. I'm like, oh man, this girl has like done everything. I got to suck it up and quit being a wuss. So that book was awesome. And another book I'm reading recently that's awesome, and it's more general for life, but I think you apply it to triathlon, is, it's called You Are a Badass. And I think it's pretty popular right now. It's like a New York Times bestseller, but You Are a Badass. And it's just really
Who's the author of that one?
I'm sorry, one more time?
Who's the author of that book?
That book, let me look it up really quick for you, is it's a Badass. And the author is Jen Sincero. And Jensincero. You Are a Badass.
We'll have that in the show notes.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next one, and let's go through these quickly now. But I always love this question as well. So I was fascinated about that Antarctic swimming book, especially. That sounds crazy. Yeah. What's your favorite piece of gear or equipment?
Yeah, I just mentioned it earlier. The Garmin 935. Love it. And the thing is so good about it is, like, compared to, say, the Apple Watch, is the battery lasts for up to 2 weeks. So I only charge it maybe once a week. Otherwise, I always got it on. I don't have to take it off at night to charge it. It keeps track of my sleep patterns. I can kind of see where I'm at with that. It keeps track. It's got the heart rate monitor right in it. So that also gives me an idea of, like, okay, how good a shape I am. Do I need recovery time? What's going on? And this thing, I never liked wearing the heart rate strap. And so even when I'm doing workouts, I find it be, pretty accurate. And so it gives you that. And then, and just syncs automatically with my iPhone with the Garmin Connect app. So I can easily track my workouts now. Whereas before with my 910, I would only connect it to my computer and upload everything like once a month, if that. So I'm just way more analytical about seeing what I'm doing. In addition, it allows me to share it, with my other runners, my colleagues. And if I have a coach or whatever, I can share that stuff automatically. So yeah, the Garmin 935, and I'm not even sponsored by them, but I just love it.
Yeah, no, I can see that, definitely.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to challenge you to keep this really short. Yeah. I think this will be difficult. And I also really like listening to you. But keep this to 15 seconds or so. What do you wish you had known or wish you had done differently at some point in your triathlon journey?
Yeah, I would say, just don't put limits on your goals and on what you can do. I don't want to take anything away from somebody like doing a half marathon or a half Ironman. That's an amazing accomplishment. But at the same time, realize, you could do an Ironman if you really wanted to. You can do an ultra triathlon. For me, one of the biggest things that helped me get through Kona 5 the first time last year when I was doing it solo is learning about Iron Cowboy, the fella who did 50 Ironmans, 50 days, 50 states. And I just kept thinking about that and go, wow, if he can do that, doing 5 Ironmans, 5 days, self-supported is not that crazy. So even in my lowest lows, I was like, I got to suck it up. This guy did so much more. I know I can do this.
Yeah, brilliant. And your website for Kona 5 for the listeners interested is kona5.com, and everything will be in the show notes. And I think that's about it. Anything else that you want to mention before we close off this interview?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. You guys are doing an awesome job and sharing some great knowledge with the triathlon world. I love your podcast. I love your newsletter, and I love what you're doing with the coaching. So I hope people are really tapping into that.
Thanks a lot. This has been Keith Rieger, ladies and gentlemen. It was a real pleasure having you on the show, Keith.
Thanks so much.
I really hope that you enjoyed that episode. As usual, you can find the show notes on thattriathlonshow.com. And hey, while you're there, press the button saying subscribe on email to the podcast, and you'll get my weekly digest of the episodes released. They come out every Thursday or Friday, and that is where I bring you some of my key takeaways in written and picture format, and so you'll get some extra insight from me about what I think about the episodes. And I've gotten a lot of feedback to include my top takeaways in the podcast episodes themselves after each episode. So thanks a lot for that feedback. That's something that I'll definitely try to do. And for this episode, my key takeaways were first that within reason, it doesn't take as much as you may think to get into ultra triathlons. Just what Keith said about not having biked for a year before doing the epic. Well, oh god, I'm forgetting what it's called again. But the Epic 5, I think, the 5 Hawaii Ironmans. So that's something to, and hadn't even been swimming either. So and he still managed to do 3 Ironmans in 5 days, and then crewing for the other 2 days. So that's if you have base fitness, it doesn't take much. It's about pacing and grit and determination. The difference in training, if you want to train properly, as Keith described for his more recent, his Kona 5 attempts when he was training properly, is a lot about just getting in the miles. That doesn't mean going out and doing the same thing every day, but Keith had his training just in his head, not on paper, in a meticulously laid out plan, and he didn't get too complicated about it. It was the same kinds of sessions as you could do for normal Ironman training, really. So he had some various intensities and got the distance in, but I guess the main point I'm trying to say here is that getting in the miles is the most important thing. That's the bullseye when it comes to ultra triathlon training. And not getting injured is another key, and especially on the run, as we talked about towards the end of the interview. Running on soft surfaces and trails like Keith does, that's something that I think is definitely super valuable. And I've been reading a lot about Alberto Salazar and his running training philosophy, as we talked about briefly in the interview. And with his runners like Mo Farah and Galen Rupp that are world class and on the track or on the road for the marathon distance, they still do 90% of their running training on trails. It's and all of Salazar's runners do that, and he's not the only one. I had some other coach at the tip of my tongue, but I forgot who that was. But still, doing that is great, but also you need to be aware of your body and any niggles that may come up, and take a rest day when needed. This will allow you to be consistent in your training, and that's, at the end of the day, the key to success. And finally, I talked with Keith for quite a while after the interview, and we got into the return of investment about doing something like Kona 5. And actually, it's not very expensive at all for what you get in terms of compared to a lot of other Ironmans. Like, for example, if you do a destination Ironman, that might set you back a whole lot more really than the Kona 5, especially if you go with your family. And you don't need a crew or anything for the Kona 5. It's self-supported. So actually it is pretty affordable for what you get to do, and do Kona 5 times, not just one. I definitely think that was a good point that Keith brought up after the interview. So I wanted to mention that. And if you're interested in doing the Kona 5, then go check out kona5.com and send in your application. So I have an important call to action for you today regarding the 2018 That's Triathlon show, and that is a survey which is just very, very quick. There are 2 required questions only, and they are just checkboxes for you to fill in. You don't need to write a single word to complete the survey. Then there are some free-form optional questions that you can answer as well, and it's fantastic if you do. But if you only have 15 seconds, answering those first 2 questions is a whole lot better than nothing. It's the 80-20, and I'll link to the survey in the show notes, or you can go directly to scientifictriathlon.com/survey and take that survey to get your voice heard about what you want that triathlon show to be like in 2018. I already mentioned this survey a couple of weeks ago on my newsletter, and I got quite a few replies already. So yeah, I want to actually talk a little bit about some of the questions that I have there, so you can, if you want to make an impact, as I said, you can impact the way I take the show. And the first question is, what types of episodes would you like me to create in 2018? And the leaders right now are solo episodes, guide style to specific topics. And as an example, I put the strength training episode that I did in episode 81. That kind of interview is leading the way, together with interviews with researchers. And then on the second place or third place, it's interviews with coaches. And I think this one with Keith would fall into that category, because we talk about training and racing tips. And he's also a coach, even though we also talked about his own accomplishments here in the Kona 5. And then it's quite some ways back to the next few kinds of episodes coming up, which include things like interviews with age group athletes, interviews with professional athletes, advanced episodes, coaching case studies where I would talk about how I coach the athletes that I coach, Q&As. What else do we have? Interview with industry people like company founders and so on. Beginner episodes. If you are a beginner, you need to go and take this survey, because those beginner episodes are lagging a bit. So that's the first question. Then it's just, what kinds of guests would you like me to interview? But that's sort of overlapping with the one that I already described, so I won't go into that. But yeah, so at the moment, the solo episodes, interviews with researchers, and interviews with coaches, they seem to be the most popular episodes. And if you want to reaffirm that, then go and check those. And as I said, you can check many of these boxes. So all the kinds of episodes you want to hear, you can check all of them. And then it's just the sum of them will kind of determine the priority of the episodes. It doesn't mean that I won't do Q&As if Q&As is lagging, for example. But it definitely means that I will do more of the ones that get the most votes. So, because I want to bring you what you really want to hear. So, scientifictriathlon.com/survey, or check the show notes. In the next episode, which will be released on Thursday, we discuss aerodynamics, rolling resistance, weight, and return on investment for cycling equipment with Sebastian Schlurke, who is a real guru when it comes to these things. And the best thing about that episode is how great Sebastian is at breaking down the cost-benefit analysis. How much do you pay per minute saved on an Ironman, for example, when you get a certain upgrade on your bike? And some of these things that we talk about and the cost-benefit analysis specifically may surprise you. Big thanks to Ventum for supporting that triathlon show. Check them out on ventumracing.com. If you want the Porsche of tri-bikes, then you want a Ventum. But as opposed to Porsches or any other triathlon bikes, you can get 110% of the value of your current bike towards the purchase of a new Ventum bike. So that's a pretty sweet deal. Thank you also to Precision Hydration for sponsoring this episode. Go and take their free online sweat test on precisionhydration.com to get a personalized hydration strategy for your next race, and use the discount code THATTRIATHLONSHOW, all one word, for 15% off. And one more thing about Precision Hydration, I will start to write some guest articles on their blog pretty soon, so make sure to stay up to date with that by subscribing to their newsletter, where you'll get to hear about that. Thank you, as always, for listening, especially to this episode that ran a bit long, but it's the first one of 2018, so I think we can start off in a grand style. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.